The most important question is not whether you are right or wrong, but are you still thinking, or are you merely repeating someone else's ideas? Suppose one afternoon, you sit quietly in your familiar room. Out there, the city still moves noisily. Lights blaze, news updates endlessly, debates surge on social networks like a river that never stops. Yet, a sudden question slips in. How many things in our head truly belong to us? Or are they just fragments cleverly scattered by the system, making us believe they are our own thoughts, while in fact, they are programmed repetitions? This is not a new question. Nearly a century ago, in a gloomy prison cell in Germany, a man wrestled with the same obsession. He did not see the world through the eyes of a philosopher abstracting existence, nor through those of a politician plotting to rule. He saw it through the eyes of a witness at the edge, a theologian, a man imprisoned by the regime he dared to oppose. Dietrich Bonhoeffer did not see evil in the shape of monsters, but in the faces of neighbors, in the smiles of colleagues, in the proud obedience of ordinary citizens, and he named that invisible force collective stupidity, not simply a lack of intelligence, but the abandonment of independent thinking. In Bonhoeffer's view, the greatest danger to humanity did not lie in underdeveloped minds. On the contrary, he emphasized that even intelligent, educated, and moral people could become tools serving a system if they lost their own capacity for judgment. It was a kind of spiritual pollution, silently infiltrating life, turning lies into truth, obedience into moral virtue, and millions of individuals into one homogeneous block where no one was brave enough to ask, "Why are we doing this?" Imagine a professor, once teaching generations of students, now fervently defending an inhumane policy. A doctor, sworn to save lives, joining in unethical experiments. A father, once loving his children, unknowingly placing them into the whirlpool of toxic ideologies simply because he believes everyone is doing it. Bonhoeffer saw it all, and he realized it did not arise from malice, but from the surrender of judgment. And this is what is frightening. Against evil, we can still speak up, resist, expose. But against collective stupidity, we are powerless, because it does not see itself as sinful. On the contrary, it clothes itself in morality, confident that it is acting righteously. People repeat what they hear, believe what the crowd praises, and denounce anyone who dares to step outside the circle of consensus. That stupidity is not noisy like a storm, but persistent like fog, quietly covering, making our eyes blur until we can no longer distinguish what is true. If you think that is only a story of the past, try looking at the present. We live in a society where the speed of information spread is unprecedented, but it is exactly there that modern stupidity finds fertile ground. We are no longer imposed upon by loudspeakers or propaganda leaflets. Instead, we are swept into the whirlpool of algorithms, of images, skillfully designed to provoke outrage, to trigger quick reactions. People share news, comment on events, join debates, but rarely stop to think, what do I really understand about this? Bonhoeffer would probably not be surprised if he saw us today. He once wrote, "Stupidity is more dangerous than evil. Against evil, we can denounce, we can use force to stop, but against stupidity, we have no weapon." This is truer than ever in the digital age. We no longer recognize stupidity in the image of a dark, uneducated person. It wears the face of degree holders, of praised leaders, of friends around us. And it exists right within the ideas we absorb daily without verification. The modern world has refined control. No longer are fiery dictators needed. Now, we have interface designers, media specialists, storytellers so skillful that they make us believe the thoughts in our head are the product of freedom. But in truth, they are only pre-predicted reactions. And when we believe we are freely choosing, that is when we are most deeply imprisoned. Here, the issue is no longer high or low intelligence, but the will to think. A person may reach the peak of knowledge, but if they let society, media, the crowd think for them, then that intelligence becomes a tool serving the system. When judgment is paralyzed, intellect does not save, but even helps reinforce the functioning of collective stupidity. Bonhoeffer saw this in his Germany, when good, moral people voluntarily became cogs in a machine of destruction. But are we any different? We ask ourselves if we are free citizens, but have we ever questioned, am I truly free, or just living according to a pre-written script? From another angle, stupidity is not merely the absence of knowledge, but a moral choice. Choosing safety instead of questioning, choosing conformity instead of loneliness, choosing the convenience of ready-made beliefs instead of the burden of independent thought. And when that choice becomes collective, it forms a solid social order, where false consensus is considered the norm, and doubt is seen as dangerous. You see, the greatest danger of our era is not lack of information, but too much pre-packaged information, making us lose the ability to digest and reflect. People may read thousands of lines of news daily, but cannot spare even one quiet minute to ask, is this true? Is there another perspective I have not seen? That excess makes the mind full, but the soul starving. That is why Bonhoeffer left us a warning. The question is not whether you are good or bad, intelligent or foolish. The question is, are you still thinking? And if we answer honestly, perhaps many times we ourselves are startled to realize most of what we call thinking is in fact just echoes from the crowd. Try to pause and look at our daily life itself. We believe we are making free choices, living according to our own will. But if we look deeper, we will see the invisible currents guiding every step, every thought, every emotion. The problem is not that we lack intelligence, but that we have let our intellect sleep and trusted our judgment to the collective, to the system. Bonhoeffer realized this from the last century, but modern science gives us concrete evidence. The Dunning-Kruger effect, for instance, shows that the less people know, the more confident they are in their opinions. Ironically, ignorance does not produce doubt, but certainty. The less knowledgeable cannot see their own limits, so they are more assertive, louder, more insistent in defending what is wrong. And it is precisely that assertiveness that makes the crowd believe. Another experiment, more famous, came from Solomon Asch in the 1950s. A group of people was asked to compare the lengths of lines, a task so simple a child could answer. But when all the others, actually accomplices of the researcher, deliberately answered incorrectly, more than 70% of the participants chose the wrong answer to blend in with the group, not because they did not see the truth, but because they feared difference, feared the strange look when standing alone in the truth. You see, this is exactly the model of collective stupidity Bonhoeffer spoke of, not the one lacking intellect, but the one who knows the truth yet abandons it to belong to the community. In a world where being accepted is more important than right or wrong, stupidity becomes the safest path. And if we think those are only lab tricks, Stanley Milgram proved a more terrifying truth. In 1961, he conducted a study on obedience to authority. Ordinary people, not violent in nature, were asked to administer electric shocks to another person, actually an actor, whenever they answered incorrectly. When the researcher, the symbol of legitimate authority, urged them on, up to 65% of participants were willing to increase the shocks to levels that could cause death. They trembled, they were anxious, but they still did it, because they believed responsibility no longer belonged to them, but had been handed to the one giving orders. That experiment exposed a cruel truth. We do not need evil people to create evil. We only need ordinary people to stop thinking and hand over their judgment to others. What Bonhoeffer observed in Nazi prisons has now been scientifically proven by numbers, by data. People do not abandon thought simply because of stupidity, but for safety, for the need to belong, for fear of isolation. It is precisely those psychological motives that can lead an entire society to voluntarily enter a state of collective blindness. And now, in the 21st century, we no longer need dictators shouting slogans. We have social media, algorithms, and a consumer culture designed to maximize attention and minimize reflection. Notice, content that makes us outraged, angry, or quickly moved often spreads many times faster than a long, careful analysis. Because the system understands emotional reactions are easier to predict than independent thinking. Thus, we become individuals who appear to be free, but in reality are led like sheep. Every click, every like, every comment is recorded, analyzed, and returned to us in exactly what we want to see. Society calls it personalized experience, but in truth, it is the collectivization of personal illusion. We live inside our own circle of belief, nourished by information that matches our biases, drifting farther away from the complex truth. Bonhoeffer would surely see here a more sophisticated version of the stupidity he once wrote about. In the past, stupidity was maintained by fear of violence, by direct oppression. Today, it is nurtured by the seduction of convenience, by the enchantment of the feeling of always being right, always belonging. We are no longer forced, but voluntarily surrender our capacity for thought, because it feels more comfortable. And most dangerous of all, intellect is not the cure. A highly educated person, skilled in reasoning, can still fall into this vortex if they choose safety over truth. Observe, speakers, journalists, politicians with great eloquence are sometimes the very ones sowing stupidity. They use flowery language, complex references, but all only to reinforce a pre-existing belief, not to open the truth. That is the form of sophisticated stupidity, not naive, but calculated, persuasive, and thus all the more dangerous. We think we are free individuals in the modern world, but in fact, most of us are only playing the role of the ideal citizen the system wants, able to consume, able to react, able to express attitudes, but only within allowed boundaries. Such a society does not need thinkers. It only needs people who are predictable, manageable, and exploitable. On a deeper level, collective stupidity is also legitimized through education and culture. We are taught how to memorize, how to answer correctly, how to follow the beaten path. But rarely are we encouraged to question, to doubt, or even to endure ambiguity. And that is exactly what makes us the standard individuals for industrial and consumer society, knowing lots of data but lacking independent thought, skilled in procedures but poor in judgment. Thus, stupidity is not just a lack of wisdom, but a social project, a product deliberately produced and maintained. It serves political stability, economic profit, and the smooth functioning of the machine. People do not want citizens to think too much because independent thought is hard to control. They only want citizens to react quickly, adapt well, fit in easily. And all those qualities can be achieved if we accept to trade judgment for comfort. Therefore, when Bonhoeffer asked, "Are you still thinking?" it was not just a philosophical matter. It was a matter of survival, because in a society where stupidity is organized, encouraged, celebrated, independent thinking becomes an act of rebellion. And it is in that act of rebellion that human dignity is saved. There is a paradox. Never before have humans had so many tools to think, so many opportunities to access knowledge as today, yet never before has independent thinking been so difficult. We are surrounded by streams of news, ready-made opinions, instant comments under every post. In that flood of information, the individual voice is drowned out, and the capacity for judgment gradually withers. Bonhoeffer, in a dark prison cell in 1943, left us with a chilling observation. Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy than evil, for evil can still be exposed, can still be resisted. But stupidity confidently wears the cloak of righteousness, turning victims into accomplices, turning obedience into a moral act. And precisely in that confidence, it thrives most strongly. If we look at the world today, we will see that prophecy still echoes. Observe the media. Simple slogans, easy to remember, easy to share phrases, gradually replacing complex analysis. Observe culture, the worship of quick emotions, the disdain for those who want to slow down, to ask questions. Observe education, programs cramming data, but rarely teaching how to think independently. And observe ourselves. How many times have we clicked share, expressed an opinion, only to receive instant agreement, not to seek the truth? At a sophisticated level, collective stupidity is no longer imposed by force, but sustained by temptation. It makes us believe we are free, when in fact, we are only following a path predetermined by the system. Algorithms not only know what we like, but also what we hate, what we fear, what easily angers us. And from there, they feed us with emotional bait, making us react instead of think. But what pained Bonhoeffer most was not that manipulation, but human willingness. Humans are not stripped of their ability to think, but voluntarily give it up in exchange for convenience, for belonging, for safety. In his time, that willingness made millions of Germans silent in the face of crime. In our time, it makes millions drift in the illusion of freedom, while in fact living according to someone else's script. So, what is the way out? The answer is not easy, because independent thinking does not bring immediate rewards. It does not bring safety. It does not bring cheering crowds. It does not bring the feeling of being right. On the contrary, it is lonely. It is heavy. It demands that we endure doubting ourselves. The true thinker must accept living outside consensus, must accept being seen as eccentric, even dangerous. Imagine someone daring to speak up amidst a crowd cheering a false idea. That person faces not only anger, but ridicule, the feeling of standing adrift in a sea of people. But it is in that very moment that freedom is tested. Do we choose to belong within stupidity or choose loneliness and truth? Bonhoeffer chose the latter path, and the price he paid was his life. But the legacy he left us is not a tragic example, but a reminder. Independent thinking is not only a right, but a moral responsibility. We may argue, but times are different now. We no longer live under dictatorship, no longer face concentration camps or guillotines. True, but is today's freedom really freedom, or just a subtler prison? If that freedom only allows us to choose among pre-written scripts, if we are only allowed to express emotions within safe borders, then that is not freedom, but false comfort. In reality, the struggle Bonhoeffer spoke of has never ended. It has only changed form. Today, the enemy is no longer a single dictator, but an entire system combining technology, media, and consumer culture. And the weapon against it is not bullets, but steadfastness in thought. That requires us to dare to slow down, to dare to doubt, to dare to ask uncomfortable questions. Is what I believe truly mine? Is the outrage I feel truly justified, or just a reaction nurtured by a curated news feed? Thinking, in this era, is an act of resistance. When we dare to pause, dare to remain silent before the flood of emotions, dare to dig into complexities, we are doing exactly what the system does not want. We have stepped outside prediction, and a human being who can no longer be predicted is a free human being. Yes, the price of intellectual freedom is loneliness, the loss of easy agreement. But the price of collective stupidity is far worse. It is the loss of oneself, the loss of dignity, the loss of the very ability to see the world with one's own eyes. Bonhoeffer left us not only a philosophy, but a choice. We can continue to live in the safety of stupidity, soothed, accepted, comforted that we are always right. Or we can accept the unease of independent thought, lonely, difficult, but also the only path that keeps us human. And then the final question still returns, echoing like a knock at the door in the night. Are you still thinking? If the answer is yes, then you have stepped outside the invisible chains. If the answer is no, then even if you live in the modern world, you have voluntarily imprisoned yourself in the cage Bonhoeffer saw a century ago. But remember, clarity does not come as a gift. It is a daily battle, a continuous act against ease, against false safety, against the laziness within our own mind. It demands that we dare to trade, sometimes convenience, sometimes the crowd's approval, sometimes even outward peace. Yet it is precisely in that trade that humans rediscover true freedom. Freedom is not doing what we want, but daring to take responsibility for our thoughts. Freedom is not having many choices, but daring to question even the choices laid out before us. And freedom is not the consensus of the majority, but the courage to walk alone when necessary. So, the final choice still lies with you. You can continue to immerse yourself in the whirlpool of information, letting collective stupidity define who you are. Or you can pause, breathe, and begin again with the simplest question. Is this truly mine? And perhaps that is the most silent yet greatest revolution a human being can make in this century. If these reflections resonate with you, leave a comment to join the dialogue, for philosophy only truly lives when it is shared. Don't forget to follow the channel to continue accompanying this journey of reclaiming the freedom of thought.